Going beyond the headlines. Asking the questions you want answered. Exploring government policies and how they impact you. We are delving deeper.
Good evening and welcome to Delving Deeper. I'm your host, Kimberly D'Souza. Delving Deeper is a new series where we chat one-on-one with cabinet members and ministry officials. Join us as they explain what's taking place in their respective ministries and its impact on you. We will ask the questions you want answered. First up, we have the Minister of Education, Dr. Nyan Gadbsy-Dolly, and the Minister in the Ministry of Education, Mrs. Lisa Mortis-Julian. Ministers, welcome to the show and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Now, Dr. Dolly, I'll begin with you first. We've had 2 years of the students being away from school. We've recently reopened school in April for everyone for physical classes. How has that been thus far?
It's been a very interesting transition back to the classroom. As you would know, in February of 2021 is when students would have entered classes for the first time since March 2020. So we focused at that time on the examination students, and so schools would have had a bit of experience, the secondary schools, a bit of experience bringing students out in the pandemic and what that meant, all of the protocols that had to be kept and so on. So at this time, all our students are out. We have about a 70% attendance across the board at primary and secondary school. Of course, at this time, the examination students are out of school. So the Form 5 and Form 6, as well as the Standard 5, their attendance is a little bit lower, but on average about 70%. And our students are attending. So we are now making that transition back. That's where we have to deal now with all of the issues for the students to be reacclimatized to the classroom. And it's been an interesting journey so far. And, so we're keeping a close eye on the schools, monitoring the students' ability to reacclimatize themselves to this environment.
Now, Minister Dolly, as you said, these students are back to school. And I think one of the major concerns right now is the COVID-19 pandemic and how many students and teachers may be affected. Now, there has been some concern in terms of how the ministry is mitigating the spread of the virus in the classroom. So, of course, 2 things. What does the ministry think about this? And secondly, in terms of the adherence to protocols, how has the ministry been ensuring that the students and teachers adhere to the protocols in schools?
So the first thing to recognize is that once we are in a pandemic and we have cases in the country, there will be cases at school. And that is why in January of 2021, the Education District Health Unit was set up. And this came out of advice from the Ministry of Health as well as our stakeholders. So this unit, headed by a doctor and about 18 nurses, this unit is a liaison unit for the schools and the Ministry of Health. So whenever a case arises at a school, whether it's a positive case or suspected, the nurses are there to guide the principals through the transition process to manage this case effectively. Because as you would know and understand, management of our cases is extremely important. So this unit directs the principal how to manage the cases. Of course, the procedure to do so is outlined in the guidelines to the principals, but when the case actually occurs, the principal does need that extra support. And so that unit is our main unit ensuring that the protocols are kept at schools. So they also run training sessions with the principals, the middle managers, the senior teachers at the primary schools and so on to ensure that they have all the guidance necessary to manage cases and to ensure that health protocols are kept at the schools. Of course, the entry protocols are still in place, hand washing, temperature checks at the gates of the schools so that we can pick up any abnormalities there and stop it from entering the school. And then there's universal masking. So another important thing we've noticed is that at the ECCE level, and Mr. Mortis-Julian, you can bear me out, where masking is not mandatory, we've seen parents actually bringing their children to school with masks. And that is mandatory at the primary school level, however, so that we ensure that there's masking, there are entry protocols in place, and we encourage the students to sanitize, we encourage them to bring their sanitizers to school, bring their extra masks, and this is reiterated throughout the day by the principals so that we keep students understanding that they must not congregate where, so in the lines, in the queues for the cafeteria, the library, etc., to reduce congregation as much as possible. The masking is in place, as well as the entry protocols.
Now, Minister, before I move on to Minister Mortis-Julian, do you believe that the complement of nurses you have within the school, is that enough?
Well, the nurses are not assigned to a particular school because they are not a school nurse. What they are is a liaison officer to guide principals. So therefore, even though it would be wonderful to have more, what we have now is an adequate coverage, and certainly if more are added, then that would add to that. But the principals are also developing their own expertise. Every case that is managed, they are developing their expertise so that their reliance on that guidance will be less and less, because we don't know how long this pandemic will be with us. So they must develop that skill. So whereas it would be very intense in the first instances, as they move along, they'll have that experience of how to manage the cases at the school.
Now, Mrs. Mortis-Julian, I'll bring you in here. I mean, what has the experience been like at the ECCE level? And I mean, I know Minister mentioned the mask wearing, but what else is being done to mitigate against the spread of the virus?
No, I don't want to boast, but ECCE is doing a fabulous job. I'm really proud of them. Again, they did a whole scenario where they invited parents for 2 weeks, an orientation program to prepare the little ones, because Minister and I both know we're very particular about our little ones. So the parents have learned the process along with their children. We also have the bubble system that I'm also quite pleased. It's aesthetically pleasing, as well as each child learns, for example, my bubble is the red bubble. So I will stick to the red area. So if something happens in the unforeseen event that a child is COVID positive, we're able to lock it down to that particular red bubble section. And I think that is what is nice about ECCE, that we can control it to that extent. Of course, we can't do that with the other older children, but ECCE, we're going through it process by process.
Nice. Now, Minister Gadbsy-Dolly, you said that, you know, the students are back out, and so there will be some cases of COVID-19. As a possible solution, will the ministry ever consider reverting to online classes?
Reversion to online classes is a governmental decision, and that would involve the implementation of restrictions across the board. Now, the UN guidance is that schools should be the last to close and the first to open. So that means that when a government is considering restrictions because of the COVID-19 pandemic, they should consider, and this is the UN's guidance, closing other sectors first and only closing schools as the last resort, because it is understood the impact on the society, not just now, but in the future when schools close, because students' learning is impacted greatly when schools close. So the decision of a government in terms of imposing restrictions, that is something that has to be considered holistically, and certainly that UN guidance is something that must be taken into consideration. So it's not a matter of the Ministry of Education reverting to online school. It is the government considering our health circumstances and deciding what restrictions need to be imposed or relaxed at any point in time based on those circumstances. So at this point in time, that is not on the table.
Now, Minister, let's shift gears a bit. We have the instances of school violence, right? We've been seeing the videos online, they're going viral. I know that the ministry released a press release stating that at least 15 schools were identified as high risk. What made these schools, you know, particularly high risk?
High risk has to do with the SAA achievement coming into the school. So what we noticed that in schools who exhibit the most violence would have students with a very low SAA percentage, under 30%, a lot of the students coming in at Form 1 level like that. They also have a very low achievement at the CSEC level at Form 5. So those two things, and then of course the incidences of disciplinary infractions that occur in the school, not just violence, but there are a number of other things, you know, indiscipline in terms of uniform, you know, speaking back to teachers. So there are a whole range of infractions, and we notice that the schools who need the most support in this area, there are a high level of those infractions exhibited by the students at this school.
Now, Minister, there's conversation in the public domain that there's an increase in school violence, so people have never seen this type of school violence before. Is this a new phenomenon?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. People have never seen. What is very new about it is the fact that our students have access to their phones, and whereas Even in the past, when students had access to phones, in a lot of cases, you could not show your phone in a classroom, or you could not use your phone at lunchtime. But post-COVID, because the technology has become so much a part of what's happening at the school, students have their phones, and I don't know that there's any school at this point that restricts the use of phones. And so the phones are very available. Students have sophisticated phones as well. They can tape, and so we are seeing the fights playing out more. So there's not necessarily an increase in violence, but there's certainly an increase in the awareness of the violence and the spread and the impact. And what is also happening is that some students feel they feel like movie stars when they see themselves in these videos. And so they go so far as to plan the violence. They're going to plan the fight, and they're going to plan, how they're going to react and what they're going to do, so that when they see it played back to them, they feel as though, they just, they did what they're supposed to do. So that is a new aspect, and that is a dangerous thing, because it makes them feel good. And I know feeling good about something that is not good is a problem. So that's where we are focusing now the effort to reduce the violence, so that we don't have students really, getting into this in that way.
Now, Minister, you would have mentioned, some people planning these fights, they're becoming popular because of these fights. I mean, is sharing it then kind of dealing into this and actually making them more popular as a result?
Yes, certainly. They want to go viral. I mean, we all know this is a time where social media stars are a thing that young people aspire to be. So when they can have a viral video, and the more we share it, the more we speak about it, the more fame it brings them.
Now, Minister, I read the press release in terms of the high-risk schools, and actually the minister or the ministry trying to, put certain police in the schools to prevent the violence from happening before it has even started. I mean, has that been working? Has it started already?
It has started, and I want to thank the police service for doing that. The community police are the ones that are responding in this school, and they are actually assigning the officers who are in charge of police youth clubs. So these officers are accustomed dealing with young people and accustomed, guiding them. And what they're attempting to do, in addition to patrolling the schools, is to encourage the young people to join their police youth clubs in their different areas, so that they have an impact in the school as well as outside of the school. And we have been seeing a reduction in the violence. So I'm sure the country could notice there are not as many videos circulating. We had about 20 serious fights in the first week, 5 in the second week, and just 1 reported in terms of serious fights where there's videotaping and so on, just 1 reported for this week. So we are seeing that. We've also asked the police to intervene with respect to after school, being present outside of the school, because what we're noticing is that more and more students are going outside of the school and starting fights outside of the school. And sometimes there are parents involved, sometimes there are other young people of the community involved. So the police have been doing that as well. So in addition to the patrols in the schools, they have been patrolling outside of the schools, and we definitely are seeing that support bearing fruit, and so we're very grateful for that, because we don't want our young people involving themselves in these negative activities. In some of the videos you've seen, there's a lot of rage being expressed. So in addition to the fact that the police are there now to clamp down on the immediate issue, we are also awaiting the report from the Interministerial Committee, which will deal with the more long-term and medium-term measures to put in place to deal with the anger that students are experiencing, the frustrations and whatever is causing them to act out in this way. It's not that there are not programs in place, but we now need to look at them a little more broadly and officially involve other people, because school violence is a country problem. It's not a Ministry of Education problem. It's a young people issue, and therefore that involves the whole of government. So that's why that Interministerial Committee, Social Development, Ministry of Youth Services, Ministry of National Security, of course, Ministry of Community Development that deals with the peer mediation program, all of these ministries, Office of the Prime Minister, Children's Authority, all of these agencies and ministries coming together to form what would be a multi-pronged solution to a country problem that is exhibiting itself in the school violence.
Now, Minister, no doubt this would have been one of the strategies that the ministry used to, curb the school violence.
Yes.
I'm just wondering what sort of short-term, medium and long-term strategies will the ministry also implement?
the implementation of the report coming from the Interministerial Committee. We are going to discuss that with our stakeholders because they are very important to have on board. That's our principals associations, of course, the recognized majority union for teachers, tutor, the national boards, because they're in charge of some of our schools. And so we're going to discuss that report and make sure we have those recommendations finalized. We'll take it to cabinet so that there'll now be an official committee from the different ministries that deals with school violence. And so it wouldn't be, even after I have left and Minister Mortis-Julian has left, that will be in place in terms of the system that deals with school violence and our children who need that extra support. So that really is our medium-term goal. And then in terms of the long term, it's the implementation of those recommendations. And we know that they will involve the formation of clubs in our schools, involving our students in extracurricular activities, all of these things to encourage a positive behavior and to really stamp out the negative. So we are looking forward to that, and that will be our medium and long-term intervention.
Nice. Now, Minister, the students are back out of school, but in the first 2 weeks or so, we would have seen parents complaining that, for example, there were leaky roofs or, things still had to be done at the school. And I'm just wondering, the ministry had 2 years to prepare for this transition back to the physical classes. How are parents still seeing, repairs being needed and lack of furniture and so on?
School infrastructure is an ongoing type of intervention. Even in the first week of school when students went out to school, after 2 years when everything would have been fine in some schools, as the full load of students came onto the system, you'd have had sewers failing, electrical issues coming up. In some cases, for example, the primary schools, they were operating with the standard 5s alone since February. And so some areas of the schools would not have been used. But with the influx of all of the students now and the use of the school, then some things would also have been realized. In some cases in schools, you would have had during this 2-week time when schools were down for the Easter vacation, some repairs would have been attempted as well. But depending on the nature of the repairs, they would have been going on into the time when school would have resumed. So the issues are always very complex. It's quite a number of them coming in. At any one day, you can have up to 10 or 20 schools. We have 850 school plans in Trinidad, and many of our school plans are over 60 years old. So if you just imagine what happens at your own home, where there's always something to fix, multiply that by 850 and add to that 8 school plans, and so there's always something happening. So in many cases, we would have to put schools sometimes on rotation to deal with the issue because the students can't be allowed on the plant if there's a sewer overflow. And that's a very common thing happening right now because as the sewers that may not have been used fully for 2 years come back on stream, you're having these issues. So it's always a very fluid and dynamic situation in terms of school repairs. And then of course add to that the fact that there must be prioritization because all of the funds available simply cannot cover all of the repairs that are required and needed. So you'd have some schools reporting issues and having to wait in line because there are other schools coming in with emergencies that must be dealt with or else a school plant will close. So issues of electrical, sewer, plumbing, these things take precedence. And so that's what you see playing out. And the ministry continues to work on all of the reports that come in, prioritizing the emergency ones. So it's an ongoing effort to ensure schools are in proper shape for our students and our teachers.
Now, Minister, thus far, what has been the greatest challenge since school reopened?
The greatest challenge has been managing COVID-19 and managing the response of parents to the natural feeling of panic that the pandemic can incite. There are some persons who are very sensitive to it. There are some persons who are a lot more adjusted to the idea that their child may be exposed to COVID-19, may contract the virus, and they will recover. So you're dealing with parents and their children. That's always a very sensitive issue, Minister Mortis-Julian, and we also have children in the school system, so we understand what it is. You're also dealing with vaccine hesitancy, where there are parents whose children can be given the vaccine, but they don't believe in the vaccine for various reasons, and so their children are not being vaccinated. So dealing with all of that and all of the high emotions that these things elicit, that's the greatest challenge, I think, of this pandemic return to school.
So, Minister Mortis-Julian, based on the registration that we would have seen with the ECCE, there seems to be more students coming in than there are more classes and more room to, place them. I mean, how is the ministry dealing with this?
Well, we have over 143 ECCE government schools and about 57 civil-based schools. And what I would like to say is that the government ECC program is doing so very well. The demand is higher because ECCE schools always existed, but we only recently, as you would know, came into the ECC business ourselves. And I thank the minister for the opportunity because I have a 3-year-old and I recently enrolled him in an ECCE school near to me because the system is fantastic. And the government system, the demand is high, but we are working on creating more spaces and schools. Maracas Valley, Seventh-day Adventist, Bellevue, Wallerfield, ECCE. So we are meeting the demand.
Now, Minister, is the ministry planning to partner with any other agencies to, boost the school and to make it come on board even sooner?
I know that the board system is always available and they can always access our ECCE director. And the process is there. You can enroll, you can register. And what I'm also proud of, in fact, Madam Minister, is that we also guide and direct the private ECCE schools. So the government is available for that.
There is a buzz among all the ministries about digital transformation. And I'm just wondering how the ministry is planning to, tackle that and how it's going to be important for all stakeholders, parents, teachers, students, that sort of thing.
Digital transformation is extremely important for the ministry. We were thrust into the digital age with the advent of COVID. One of the main steps that we've made, which will really transport us into that digital age, is establishment of the Educational Technology Unit at the Ministry of Education. So there's now a unit, and that has been established for just about a year, and we are staffing, there's a director, and we are building out the staff of that unit. Those persons are the ones tasked with carrying forward our digital transformation agenda. And the hub of all of this is our school-based learning system. And that is where we're going to have the teachers being able to have their e-classrooms created. What that will do is allow a teacher to not just have a physical presence, but a virtual presence. And it will allow students to be able to access educational material from their teacher online at any point in time.
Is this the hybrid approach that you were mentioning?
That is the hybrid approach. Right. So the school learning management system will allow for us to do e-testing in a classroom setting. The teachers can set quizzes and so on online. And so the emergency response system that came into place with COVID, that emergency transition to digital media, that will now be organized on our school learning management system. So we now have staff who are engaged currently in loading schools onto that system, so that by the end of May, we are going to have at least 28 schools on, and those teachers will undergo the training to ensure that they know how to load their e-classroom and they'll be able to interact with their students in that way. And so that will be our first iteration, and then we'll continue adding schools on until we have this built out. What that allows us is for instances where there can't be physical school, as we have seen with COVID, the teachers can utilize their virtual classroom in an organized way. And it allows students the facility of interacting digitally, and we can load on things such as typing programs to allow them to learn to type properly, allow them to develop this facility, because of course we are also moving with CXC towards e-testing at the CSEC level and the CAPE level. So our students need to have that familiarity and that facility with the digital environment for us to make that leap, which we certainly do need to make. So what the digital transformation does to the ministry is give us educational resilience, and that is what we need to build into the system. So no matter if we don't have physical school for some reason, we don't know, COVID was our reason here, we don't know what else it would be, our students have educational continuity built in and a seamless transition. That's how our tertiary education institutions were able to transition so seamlessly when COVID hit. It wasn't so seamless for our primary and secondary school level and ECCE because we did not have e-classrooms built in. So that's what we are moving to. That's the hub of it. It will allow us to have our national open school where the traditional teaching that is offered post Form 5 for students, citizens of the country, that can be held online, and many other things can flow from having that digital hub for the ministry. So that's our main focus in terms of digital transformation.
So, Minister, at the end of May, that's actually pretty soon.
Yes, we aim to have 28 schools. So the first iteration should be at the end of May. So we aim for 28, and we're hoping to get those online, and then the training starts. So yes, we've been working at this for over a year now. So that's part of it.
Nice. Now, of course, the ultimate goal is the e-classrooms and that hybrid approach. But I'm just wondering, how much did it take us to get there? Or how much did it cost us? So financial and, of course, all the other resources that we had to use.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that would have cost a lot would have been supplying devices to students. Because for them to be able to have access to the classroom, they must have a device. So we would have invested, as the government, 50 million in purchasing devices, and we are purchasing another set this fiscal to ensure that our students have devices available to them. And I want to thank, as I mentioned, that the corporate sector who partnered with the ministry and was able to supply about 23,000 devices to our students. So I want to thank the corporate sector for their input there. So that's one cost, supplying the devices. And then we are now in a partnership with DigiData, where they are contracted to actually supply broadband and Wi-Fi throughout the schools. And so that's another cost that we are putting towards getting that done. And of course, just the hire of the Educational Technology Unit, that's a cost that is now going to be incurred every month in the ministry to ensure that we have that staff. It's about 25 persons strong. So these are the costs that are involved. But of course, the benefit from what we will get out of it, I think it's really priceless. So we count it that way.
So let's discuss the education policy, especially the one for, I believe, is up to 2027.
Yeah.
I mean, can you provide us with some updates on that?
The education policy would have had extensive consultation. It started in 2020, where we did our first consultation, and we got from the population what are the main areas that we should focus on. So we went back to the drawing board, looking at the policy that existed at the ministry, and looking at what we got of the consultation. And we would have done some reworking on that. And then we had our second consultation in 2021, which dealt with the specific areas, like curriculum reform, of course, the transition from primary to secondary school, TVET rationalization, that's our technical vocational area. That's just some of the areas. Digital transformation is another. Professional development of the ministry. So all of these things would have come out of the first consultation in 2020. So in 2021, we went to the public with 8 specific areas saying, okay, this is how we think we want to approach these areas based on what you'd have said in 2020. So we got now specific recommendations as to what the population thought about our approach to dealing with these matters. Of course, the SCA committee is also set up coming out of those 2020 consultations. And that committee, its report is due in August, and that committee deals with the SCA specifically. So we now have the concept paper coming out of the consultation of 2021, and that is the paper that we are now reviewing within the ministry, and we're going to go back with that paper now to Cabinet to say, okay, this is what would have come out of it, and this is our policy, and this is our way forward from 2022 to 2027. So we're at that point now.
Mrs. Mortis-Julian, Dr. Dolly, thank you so much for joining us, but I must get your final thoughts. Minister Mortis-Julian, we'll start with you first.
I just want everyone out there to understand that everything that they're going through, Dr. Dolly and myself, we're going through it also with our children, with society, as working mothers. So we know exactly all the feelings that are out there right now, but we're getting through it together. And I know Dr. Dolly would blush, but it's an honor to work with someone this committed, this focused. She's not just an academic, she's also a very practical person. So I know she's getting the job done, and I'm really happy to be at her side.
I don't know how else you can top that, Dr. Dolly. But final thoughts.
What I want to assure the population is that Minister Mortis-Julian and myself take our job very seriously, and we are willing to put in the work that has to be put in at this time. This is a pivotal time in education. The pandemic has thrust upon us some very serious situations that must be dealt with. Digital transformation, the health of our students, the infrastructure of our schools. And we are committed to ensuring that our schools are run in the best way possible so that our children's education is maintained and the future of this country is assured. So we take our job very seriously, and we will continue to do so. And so parents can be assured, and the country on a whole, that they have persons here who understand and who are committed to getting the job done.
Dr. Dolly, Mrs. Mortis-Julian, thank you so much for joining us on our very first episode of Delving Deeper. Join us at the same time and same place next week for another edition of Delving Deeper. I am Kimberly D'Souza, and on behalf of the entire crew, have a good night.